Buenos dias, good morning. This is Christopher Sanchez, your favorite Chicano in politics. And today we are filming a really important episode. As many of you all have been listening or watching in the news, California has been at the forefront of the conversation as it relates to elections in the upcoming 2026 elections. Joining me today are some new friends. First, Ruth Sosa.
Hi.
Manuel Buenrostro,
Hola, ¿cómo están?
and of course your favorite Latina, your Latina Advocate.
Hi.
So as I was mentioning, this episode is really important. We typically have an audio episode every month, and that's because we're just kind of going through the legislative process. But given the importance of this conversation, we felt the need to actually film something so our viewers on YouTube, our visual viewers, and our audio viewers, listeners could have an episode because of the important conversation. As folks know, there's been conversations about President Trump wanting to ask Texas, or has asked Texas, to redistrict maps or create new congressional seats for Republicans so he can stay in power and the House can continue to be controlled by the Republicans under the Trump administration. And as a response, Governor Gavin Newsom of California had said that we are going to respond to create checks and balances in our democracy. So before we get into the conversation and how we feel this is going to impact Latino voters and what does this mean for Latino communities, we're going to have Carol give us an overview of, well, how is this even happening in California?
Yeah, well, everything kind of happened overnight. It went really quickly, but there are three main things that are making it happen. So we have ACA 8, the constitutional amendment. Essentially, it's a bill to amend our state constitution, which would suspend our independent redistricting commission. And so it basically allows the legislature to draw their maps, which will be used up until 2030 for the next census. That's one. Two, AB 604 by Aguilar Curry defines what those maps look like. So it's essentially a bill to adopt the maps. It lays out the actual description and the boundaries, and it kind of gives us a better picture of what those maps will look like. And then three, by Senator Cervantes, SB 280, it essentially calls and funds that special election. It creates that process to ensure that we have it on the ballot November 4th. And it shares how we can ensure that this election will actually take place. And very quickly, as background, our independent redistricting process was established in 2008, later amended in 2010 to include congressional maps. And so essentially that's what we're voting here, to suspend that redistricting commission so we can move forward with what the legislature worked on these past few days.
And so that is the process that was laid out, and that's the reason why there's going to be an election in November. And so the reason why we brought these guests today is because they've all done some work in campaigns and policy. And so before we move on, I want to give Ruth and Manuel an opportunity to introduce themselves and have a little bit more of a conversation. So Ruth, tell us a little bit about yourself, being a first-time guest on the podcast. Welcome and thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Well, thank you for having me, first of all. Like you mentioned, my name is Ruth Sosa. I'm a first-gen Latina from the Central Valley, daughter of immigrants. So representing the Central Valley, if any Central Valley folks are out there.
That's right.
I personally got involved in politics because I grew up experiencing a lot of disparities that I now work on, like issues that I now work on and advocate for. And so I've been working in the youth advocacy and youth organizing space for about 7-8 years now, if you count my time as like a student organizer, which I do. And so, I really work on a lot of issues that impact the socioeconomic mobility of young folks and folks from disenfranchised backgrounds. And really doing that through like younger generations, I think, is the way that that we can really make that change. I'm the policy strategist for Power CA Action. And so a lot of what we do at Power CA Action is really mobilizing young folks and their communities all across the state. because we recognize that the fight for a California that serves us all is gonna be through these communities and through issues that impact them, and we really need to prioritize the needs of these communities. So yeah, that's a little bit about me.
Well, I'm glad your organization is doing everything it does. I wish when
Yeah,
I was a young voter, someone was knocking at my door, but at
yeah,
least now there's groups like this. I'm sure they're
yeah,
out there. They just didn't want to find me.
yeah,
But Manuel,
yeah.
please tell us about yourself, some of the work you've done with your long length of experience. And that's the reason why he's here. No.
Thank you. Thank you. Well, thanks for having us here, Carol and Chris. Just a little bit about myself. I'm a first generation. Um, I'm the first generation person in my family that graduated from college and also got a
Let's
master's
go.
degree. So
Thank
for
you.
me, that's why I work in education. So for me,
Mhm.
education has been a pathway to additional opportunities and to making sure that we have choices in our careers. So that's one of the reasons that I still work in education. In my daytime job, I work for Californians Together as a director of policy. We are a statewide advocacy coalition organization. We have over 30, nearly 30 coalition members that are part of our coalition, and we come together to advocate for English learners across California. We advocate for the rights of all students to have access to bilingual education, the rights of our students to maintain their home language. And part of that work is also supporting the different types of English learners, which includes our immigrant students and newcomer students across California. Just a little bit about my what I do outside of work too. I've been involved in local politics in Sacramento for many years. I think for me, it's about making sure that we have an impact in our communities. And I started my political interest when Obama ran for president back in 2008, and that's the first time that I volunteered full time for a campaign. And there you begin to see the value of engaging voters and talking to voters about your experiences and why it matters to you.
And
Mhm.
Manuel, I'm not sure about this history of your organization, but it just sounds like, when it comes to election work and about things being in front of the voters in California, it does the history of your organization come a little bit out of Prop 187 when there was this anti-immigrant sentiment, not wanting children to be able to learn English as a second language classes or anything like that? Is that some of the history from the organization?
Yeah, so we were actually born in the '90s out of the fight against the English only proposition in
Mhm.
California.
That's right.
Mm,
So
with P. Wilson, right?
we, the coalition that was formed at the time was not successful in fighting that proposition. That's why we had 20 years of English only education policy in California. But out of that experience, we rose out of that fight and decided that we needed to come together to speak with one voice for English learners and be more strategic and also change hearts and minds. How do we change the narrative and the
Yeah.
perception that the public has around bilingual education?
And if you look at where California is at now, we have dual immersion classes,
Mhm.
children learning first another language, in some
Mhm.
communities Korean, in some communities Cantonese, in
Mhm.
Spanish, of course. And so,
Mm-hmm.
Mhm.
of course, from the foundation that California's Together and others like Cabe and other folks
Mhm.
have been doing. So thank you. And then just the last thing I have to do with Manuel. So since you have a master's, it's true. Is it true that I heard some people call you Don Manuel?
People started calling me Don Manuel after I got married last year.
Oh, congratulations.
I think they do it as a term of endearment.
Yeah.
I mean, every year you get a little older, so I guess eventually it might be something that
I
I
was just
embrace.
curious because I was thinking about getting my master's. If I get to be called Don, then someone.
Well, I was actually thinking if you get two master's degrees, then you might become a Jedi master. I think that's how it works.
I think so. But
Yeah.
bringing it back to our conversation, and thank you both for introducing yourselves.
Mhm.
So, there's this process that was in front of that's now in front of Californians. Wanted to just open it up to the group, the whole group, to see, what do you think of this process? Today it's August 22nd. Voters, I believe the election's gonna be on May 4th. It's always typically that. I'm sorry, November 4th. It's typically that first Tuesday in November. So there's not a long time for voters to get educated. It's going to
Yeah.
be a very rush to the door. So what are some of your thoughts on what this process looked like and how it's going to be?
I
Yeah.
feel like it's a little rushed, and I feel like we need all hands on deck to make this happen because special elections already have low turnout. We know the last special election when Governor Newsom was on the ballot, it wasn't a surprise that it was a 60-40 vote, but it's a matter of whether or not people are going to continue to show up because this isn't something that we anticipated to be on the ballot or to be like for us to be voting on generally in November. And so when we look at the population it's going to severely impact our kids. I know education is something that we like talking about, and 55% of our students, maybe even a little more, are Latino students. So everything that's going to be impacted at the federal level is really going to be impacting our community, our families, our students. And so, we really need people to be showing out because this essentially in turns impacts our funding, our abilities to support our families, and all the services that come from the federal government.
That's right.
Yeah, I totally agree. And I think like you said, all hands on deck as Power California Action. I think really our responsibility is to really turn out voters, to engage them, to educate them on what's going on so that young voters go to the polls and they cast their ballot regardless of what their stance is. And so I really think that we need to continue to fight to defend our democracy because that's really what this is. This is an attack on our democracy. This is a direct attack on our communities. We've seen this administration consistently attack the Latino community, the Black community, AAPI community, and this is just another way of holding power and keeping power to continue to attack us through 2028. And so I think it's really important for us to really engage these communities where they're at and try and get them to turn out.
And I would say, I mean, it's rushed, but this comes in response to what's happening in Texas and what's happening across the country. And it's important to remember that if we want to effectively push back against the worst impulses of this administration, we have to respond quickly. And this is what California is doing right now for that. And something that I'll say is that for me, this election is really about protecting our communities and in many cases, protecting a lot of our highest need students. But because if we want to start holding what's happening accountable, it's going to require some changes. And what we're doing is fair because we're doing this in response to what's happening in Texas. And it's also a measured response. What's happening is not necessarily something that's going to be in place forever. It's sunsets in 2030. And it's in direct response to what we see happening in other states.
That's absolutely right. And I think that while this is a rush process, it's more of like kind of an emergency, right?
Yeah.
And if you think about it, our democracy has always had the principle of checks and balances, right? That's why there's only 2 members in the Senate that represent a state, regardless of how big it is, right? Because California should have a bunch, but we only got 2 in the U.S. Senate. And then the House has a bunch of members that's representative. And so we've always had the checks and balances. There's always been something. And then so when a president comes to states and says, hey, let's add more seats so we can stay in power, and California responded because the state has its own right to do so, right? And I think the other thing I want to add to that is that the really big picture, I don't know if I haven't really seen it in headlines, but it's about the House of Representatives because it's about funding. It's about they passed that basura of a bill that we talked about last time on the last episode, but it is about funding because when you can fund things or strip funding from certain things, that has the greatest impact and that could move your agenda forward, right?
Absolutely.
And so if you stack the House, right, with so many votes, then you can kind of do whatever you want. And so I think that is the bigger picture. I think a lot of the headlines are getting into the nitty gritty of redistricting and what does this map look like and what does that map look like. But we have to zoom out and say, well, why are we doing this, right?
Yeah.
I love what you said about it being an emergency because a good analogy is if your house is on fire and the firefighters arrive and they want to enter your house to help you, you're not going to say, wait, this is too rushed. Let me put my chanclas on, right? You're gonna want them to respond quickly. So I love what you said about it. It's an emergency and it's a response to an emergency.
Yeah, and I think
absolutely.
when you compare our maps to Texas maps, right, I think we consider our population, our demographics a little bit more in this map making process where you look at Texas and they're comparing it to how much power a person has by, percentages, right? Like how many Latinos will it take to have the same power as like their white counterpart or a black person in Texas and so on. And then you look at California, and I think we kind of consider that in our map making process, right? We're not being disenfranchised here. We have a little bit of a more fair say than other states. And when we look about what the rest of the country is going to do, we don't know what Ohio, Florida, Missouri, or Indiana are going to be doing as GOP states. But then again, we have to consider whether Nebraska, Maryland, New York, Illinois, New Jersey, if they're going to follow through and do something, right? Because when you think about it, let's say we do get these 5 states our 5 maps to switch. We don't know if they'll actually be blue,
Yeah,
right? Like we can hope for it,
absolutely.
but we don't know. We don't know what voter turnout's going to be like. But in Texas, it's almost for sure. And so to some extent, we're nulling Texas's 5 seats, but then we don't know what the other states will look like.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, and then the other thing I wanna add is that there was a lot of conversation on the process, and well, Texas was saying our process was better than your process, and I think the difference between our process and their process, and I know it's like a soundbite to everybody now, but the voters actually get to choose,
Yeah.
and the one question that's going to be in front of the voters: you approve this map or not? It's either you like it or you don't. You can vote yes, you can vote no, or you can just sit and stay at home, right? That's not what we want people to do. We want people to actually turn out and have their voice heard and made, and then I think we'll get into the conversation about what does this election look like on how to drive people out. But the other thing I'll say is that so we had our intern Griselda, shout out to Griselda,
Hey.
do an analysis of what does the current maps look like in California and what is the proposed maps that voters are going to be voting on. And from what we looked at, not only do the Latino voting blocks stay the same, in some instances, Latinos actually, the voting block increases. So where there might have been 50% before in one district of a Latino voting population, there's now 53 or 54%. So an increase by 54 and so forth. And in the majority of the districts, as we broke down the numbers, most communities were able to get increases in those voting blocks. In some instances, there were small changes, but for the most part, they stayed the same. And then people are like, oh, well, that means that it's going to be Democratic for sure. That's not necessarily
No.
true, right?
Yeah.
There are Latinos who vote other ways and who we all have different opinions, right?
Exactly.
But yeah, I wanted to see if there's
Yeah.
anything else that you're thinking about this process, or that you thought of in this process, that stood out to you, or anything of that nature.
Yeah, well, I just think like reiterating Carol's point is that Texas was really trying to undermine Black and Latino Texan voters. And that was their purpose. That was their purpose when they were creating their maps. And we saw it very clearly. And through our California process, again, I'm not favoring either one.
Yeah.
But I do think there's a lot of opportunity for Latinos to have their voice heard. But I do also think there's an opportunity for Latinos to stand in solidarity with like Black and AAPI communities who aren't being as largely represented in our district maps. And do want to call that out and also acknowledge the fact that it's our time to really stand in solidarity, especially as community organizations who are doing the groundwork to really engage those communities and talk about what's at stake if we do lose this election.
Absolutely. And the so I think we should just really get into it. Is so there's going to be the special election on November 4th.
Mhm.
From all of our experiences, I think we've all knocked on doors before, and
Mhm.
we know what voters say and don't say. We know
Yeah.
how they treat us. You know, sometimes it's go away or be like, oh, I thought you were selling me something. I'm like, yeah, I'm
Yeah.
selling you freedom. No, I'm selling you
Yeah.
some
No, wait,
democracy.
but literally.
Yeah. But so in many elections, there's a good guy and a bad guy. There's
Yeah.
someone they could point to, and they either like them or don't like them. Or
Yeah.
I think I was telling Manuel before I got in that I was like, yeah, we're not gonna be able to go be like, this person's gonna fix your speed bump, or they're gonna put a stop sign in your
Mhm.
yard. So what do you think it's gonna look like when people knock on doors? What's the messaging gonna look like? How are Latinos gonna get engaged in this election? How are we gonna
Yeah.
get turned out?
Yeah.
I mean, for me, my first thought is this has to be about protecting communities
Mhm.
and families
Mhm.
that have been impacted by a lot of the uncertainty that we see with families getting picked up on the streets, family members getting picked up in the raids. The other aspect of it too, because I work in education, is there's been a lot of uncertainty placed on districts with withholding of federal funds,
Mhm.
with lack of knowledge of whether funds will be released, a lot of mandates that are being placed that were not previously being placed on higher education institutions. So it's got to be about that. It's got to be about protecting communities.
Mhm.
It's got to be about making sure that we bring more stability to what our institutions can expect.
Yeah. I can also say for Power CA Action, for the last few years, we've run several polls and surveys, and we've talked to young voters. We've also talked to them on the ground, not just through surveys, but we really know that what mobilizes them is the issues that they care about.
Mhm.
And right now, the federal government has cut funding to SNAP, medical programs, Medi-Cal, education, all things that are impacting our communities directly. And they're feeling that. Not only that, but also increasing tariffs and just the rising cost of living. And so I think when we're framing these issues to them, it's how much longer can we take these cuts and how much longer can we allow this federal administration to prioritize billionaires and the rich over our communities. And I think that's really what's going to mobilize our young voters to get out to the polls and take this seriously.
Yeah, when
Mhm.
young voters are shopping and they're like, "What do you mean I gotta buy
Mhm.
this dress at $30 instead of the
Mhm.
20 before?" Well, that was a
Yeah.
tariff, that's why, or whatever. Maybe
Yeah.
or these sneakers now cost another $50 instead of what
Yeah.
it used to be.
Or
They're-
groceries.
All of
yeah,
it.
yeah.
The
Yeah. I'm like,
affordability aspect of
yeah,
it. We can't
exactly.
afford to live anymore.
What
Exactly.
was there was a Senate hearing or a congressional hearing where a member was like, "Why are we putting a tariff on bananas? We can't grow bananas in the United States." And they're like, "Because it needs to be made in America." That was the response, and they're like, they just don't grow here."
Literally.
But yeah, the affordability and eating, right, and all that.
Yeah.
But what do you think, Carol? What's gonna drive Latino voters? How are we gonna get engaged?
I don't know. I think the affordability piece, right?
Yeah.
But like, I think we have to be strategic on how we piece it together
Yeah.
because when you think about it, like housing, rent,
Mhm.
healthcare, like our education, like Manuel said, childcare, all of these things are all intertwined, like you were saying.
Yeah.
And so I think we have to piece it together for people to understand how it has like a real impact on them, on their daily lives, because some folks can't even afford to be politically engaged.
Yeah.
Like they don't even know what's happening most of the time. It's a lot of like they want to blame one person
Mhm.
or they want to be able to say, well, I vote and I don't see anything happen or whatever it looks
Mhm.
like, right? And in a democratic state, I feel like this is our way to kind of fight back a little bit and push back on that narrative. But we have to make it digestible for people to understand like the real life
Absolutely.
consequences and how we could push the needle on these things at least a little bit.
Absolutely.
And I think that when you look at the last election, the last general election, and the messaging that the Trump administration, the Republicans put forward, and then the messaging that the Democrats put forward, it for some reason didn't sit well with voters, or just maybe didn't sit well, just didn't resonate with voters, right? And a lot of what the Democrats were doing in that general election was Trump's a bad guy, don't vote for Trump. And
Mhm.
then what Trump's administration was doing, Trump's with you, vote for Trump, right? And then
Mhm.
they used other messaging as well. Not saying it was good, but some
Yeah.
reason it resonated with voters clearly, right? Um, do you think that what the messaging that was used in the previous elections is going to resonate this time? If so, why or why not?
Well, that's why I think this needs to be like 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 was said before. It needs to be about how these changes will lead to improvements in people's lives, whether it's in the pocketbook, whether it's in other areas, like keeping them safe. It needs to be about that.
Yeah.
If the message is primarily about democracy, which I think is an important aspect of this election,
Yeah.
I'm not trying to dismiss it, but voters, I think something that we learned from the last election is that the framing of democracy by itself did not resonate with enough voters.
Ooh,
It did resonate
yeah.
with some voters
Yeah.
because some voters did vote for Harris, but it wasn't enough voters. So you got to focus on pocketbook issues. You got to focus on personal lives.
Yeah.
And I mean, when I would knock on people's doors, they didn't really care about like the sound bites. They just wanted to know, how is this candidate that's running for a local office or for a congressional office, how is this person going to help me with my daily life and my expenses?
Absolutely. I'm very big on issue-based organizing, so I very much agree with that. I think when we're talking to folks who don't typically turn out to vote, the reason they don't turn out to vote is one, because of resources. Often they don't have the resources or time or availability, whatever that looks like for them, to actually go out and vote or like educate themselves, to feel confident enough to cast a ballot. But the other thing is they don't see how it directly ties to the day-to-day struggles that they're facing. They know I can't afford rent, I can't afford groceries, I can't afford healthcare. They don't know like this is how this person's vote will impact my healthcare. Or like this is how this policies that are passing at the state level might impact my ability to pay rent. Right. And so making those connections for people is super important. And so I think when it comes to this election, this special election coming up, we need to really prioritize those aspects for voters, really making the connections of like, this is how it'll impact you in your day-to-day life. This is how this administration has maybe like the votes that they've already been making have impacted us now. And it's going to continue to happen. And I think it also depends like what communities we're talking to, right? Because there's been communities in California that have been heavily impacted by ICE raids.
Yes.
And so when we're talking about this, like, do we want this to continue? Do we want to see this happening or exacerbated over the next few years in our communities? And this is exactly why we need to vote in favor of this redistricting map, because there's a lot at stake if we lose.
Yeah, and I kind of hope that they don't go down this partisan path on reaching out to voters, because I've heard from, Republicans say, like, I voted for Trump, but I didn't think my neighbor was going to be deported, right? I didn't think mothers were going to be deported. I didn't think kids would be separated from their parents.
Right.
And so, this is something that they're seeing in their communities. And then you look at it from folks who have businesses. It's a little disappointing that, it has to take that economic pocketbook impact, right? But you're seeing how folks are also losing out on their own living because their employees aren't showing up. But it's like, what could we do if this is the best way for them to be safe? And so I really hope that this is something where people will show up because they realize like this isn't the way that we want our country to go, or it's not the pathway that, we essentially like anticipated, whether you're a Democrat or a Republican,
Right,
or anywhere in between.
Yeah, and I think that's going to be the big difference, is because prior to the election, they weren't seeing the actions of this current federal administration, and they're like, it's not going to be that bad. It's, you guys are just saying it, but it's really not going to be that bad. And then now people have come out and they're like, oh no, like this is worse than I ever imagined. And I so the funny part is, like, while we talk about the Latino voting bloc, it's strengthening in these maps, where we see numbers increasing, there's that myth out there of like, or maybe it did happen. I haven't read the polls so closely about the male Latino who voted for the Trump administration or for Trump, right? Does that person continue to trend that way, or does that person now flip in this special election? Right? But those are the issues. But I think here's my biggest question: how do you tell someone go vote for a map? How do you turn someone out for that?
Yeah. I mean, I think it's kind of like what we've been like framing it as, is there's an impact on communities if we do not vote in favor of this. Like there will be a direct impact on the policies that pass that impact us. Right now, we've already seen education cuts. We've already seen cuts to benefits like EBT, SNAP, Medi-Cal, and so we will continue to see that. We will continue to see that if we lose this election.
I mean, it's not about the map; it's about what the map allows
Mm-hmm.
Right.
to happen
Exactly.
at the national level. And again, we're not in a vacuum here. So
Yeah.
if we were in a vacuum, we wouldn't be necessarily changing anything.
Mm-hmm.
We're doing this in a national landscape. And something that was interesting, we talked about what type of voters we reach out to. I think there's a message to be made for independent or even moderate conservative voters. That tend to like divided government and at the national level, um,
Mm-hmm.
where they could see a future where if Democrats do take control of the House after the midterms, where government ends up passing different sets of policies, they might end up negotiating a little bit differently with the administration, and that might lead to improvement in people's lives. And that type of governance, I think a lot of independents resonate with. I mean, if you look at a lot of the history of this country, we typically have presidents that come into power with a lot of times if they have control of both chambers or one of the chambers, it flips in the midterms, and then they have to figure out how to work with the other party. I think we're a country where a lot of our independents, a lot of our moderate voters, they like the idea of parties working together. Well, guess what? The only way that happens is if we actually have these reforms and these maps changing, so that we give the administration an opportunity to work with the other party.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and I think that kind of goes back to like what Carol was saying is that, well, it's one, I think, the messaging about what's at stake that we've all been talking about voting for the maps. But two, even if we vote for these maps, it doesn't mean Democrats are going to get elected, right?
That's right.
It could mean, and I think here's the more wild thing that I think folks maybe aren't thinking about in the picture is that, all right, let's say the maps get voted on, they're approved by the voters of California, and the person who's sitting in that seat today may not be the same candidate who's going to run for that seat. There could be another person from their party who runs and is more appealing to voters in that new district, right? And vice versa for those that feel that they're incumbents and that they're comfortable. It might just be another really good seat for somebody else to represent because now the certain demographic changes make it more appealing for certain candidates and so forth. So there's that. It doesn't mean necessarily we will get the result that is we're looking for, right? Or that, let me rephrase that the maps are looking for, that Governor Newsom has put forward, right?
Yeah.
Well, there's still work that needs to be done by the candidates and their
Absolutely.
campaigns
Yeah.
to get the voters. So the voters are not stupid. They pay attention to who's running and whether they're genuine, what they're proposing. And I would say it also doesn't mean that one party or the other is going to win in the midterms.
Yeah.
There's still a lot of work that needs to be done. I mean, if, for example, if the Democrats want to win control of the House, there's still a lot of work that needs to be done to message to the voters and let them know what they plan to do if they do gain that power. So, I mean, it's not a done deal, and there's work that needs to be done.
Exactly. And I think you all probably know, like, we had, the election, the not the special election, but the midterm election isn't going to happen until November next year, right?
Yeah.
And all the things that could happen from now until then, nobody anticipated an LA wildfire, right? No one knows what natural disasters are going to happen between now and then, and and maybe this is a thing that pressures the federal government to actually act, right? We didn't see a whole lot of resources pour into Altadena with the wildfires there, with the disaster that happened there. So I think there's a lot of things that maybe some folks aren't talking about that they're not realizing. And it would be interesting to think about, like, who is going to step up, who we're going to see come out in this special to move things and stuff like that. So, but yeah, I think there's a long time between now and the midterms that voters are gonna have their own opportunity to analyze and see what is coming to the table.
Yeah, absolutely. I think you brought a good point about the LA fires, because I think another thing that is really important for messaging is that we were literally denied funding
Yeah.
for like fire
part.
relief, right? And so if something else comes up within the next year, which hopefully it doesn't, at least that's what we hope for, right? But we need to make sure that we're really framing this as like, hey, like these are the actual things, the tangible things that we can see that are directly impacting us, that the federal government is refusing, like quite literally punishing us for the way we voted. Um, and that's impacting our communities directly, right? And so I think, yes, staying away from like partisanship, because we know that like at least for young voters, they don't show party loyalty. Staying away from partisanship, but also calling out the administration where we can, because this is a direct attack from the administration on California voters and on California communities, not just voters, but California communities at large.
And one thing I do want to point out when we're talking about young voters, and I think all of us, we've all done a lot of education work and policy, and especially representing young voters yourself, is I think it is going to have to be young voters who have to be the ones that are engaged, and
Yeah.
and the hard part's going to be some of them are moving right now, so do they know they got to re-register? If they're living in UC Merced and so forth. But the attacks, Carol and I were just at a conference in San Diego with a bunch of college presidents from the different systems here in California, and we were just saying, "Hey, how's it going?" And as we were exchanging like the different things that we're all working on, it wasn't excitement. It was, we're going through rough times,
Yeah.
and if the presidents are feeling it, we know the students are feeling it,
Yeah.
because things like financial aid are being hit. Folks aren't wanting to come forward and apply for financial aid, or student programs that they were once in are no longer there. The attacks on some of the equity centers and programs at campuses are being stripped away.
Yeah.
The UCLA 1 billion threat is a real thing, and that if it happens at UCLA, is it not going to happen other places, right? And I think that's something that young voters would probably resonate with the most.
Yeah.
How many of them are like, financial aid needs to happen for me, all right? Because or else we widen the gap of who's able to go to college or not.
But I think that'll also highlight how the social media has shifted so much, where it's hard to distinguish what's real,
Yeah.
what's not, who's targeting who, how are they targeting folks. I feel like I go back and forth on, like, even within my own family, I'm like, that's not real. That's
Yeah.
AI.
Yeah.
Or like,
I'm like, Mom, that video of that baby dancing isn't real.
Yeah, like whatever it is, right?
Yeah.
So I think I worry a little bit, right?
Yeah,
Because we need to go
absolutely.
in equally as hard, if not harder, because like, I feel like the odds are stacked against us, even on social media.
Yeah. Well, I
Right.
think that's why it's really important to have those like community partnerships, and like community organizations that are doing the grassroots work with communities, but also like institutions like campuses, the like campus administration, for them to be doing that outreach as well. Because a lot of them do have, I think all of them, right, have voting centers now. And so really making sure that that they're reaching out to their students, engaging them, getting them re-registered, and getting out the vote on their campuses too.
Yeah.
And I don't want to pretend like I have a good answer for that, because I think at this point I'm in a different generation, but I get the sense that there has to be a social media game in this campaign to reach voters where they're at, especially our youth. If they're on social media, we have to reach them on social media in the different channels. But I think for me, this also highlights the importance of the personal connections, like you said. We need people to still go door to door. We still need people to talk to their friends and families about the impact that this has on their personal lives. Not theoreticals, just facts about how this is impacting your life and how a change might impact, or how things might play out differently if this change happens.
Absolutely. I totally believe in the like power of storytelling. And so I think it's really important for folks when they are talking to people to make it personal, to share like, this is exactly how it's impacted me. Like I used to be on SNAP and now I don't qualify, or I used to have like access to this clinic used to be in my community and now it's shut down. Or my aunt was here and now she's not. Now she's in Mexico. And so like really talking about those like personal impacts that are going to like sway other folks to like actually turn out to vote is super important.
And as we talk about like messaging and how's it happening, so just the other day, a friend who lives in Los Angeles County received an anti-mail piece already. That said, don't vote for this. this and
Yeah.
that. I
That's
didn't read
fast.
the whole mailer, but the one thing that folks who are probably against this process and the maps is that they often flood mailboxes, right? All these fancy mailers, this and that. And my favorite part about that is that during a normal election cycle, you could typically make a candidate look like horrible or ugly. Like you choose their ugliest photo and send it to like people. It's effective. It's effective.
Yeah.
They're like, mira, like they don't look so good. They're not healthy. I don't know if I'm gonna vote for them. I swear to God, my grandma called me one time. She's like, but are they gonna live? And I was like, that photo was photoshopped. Relax, grandma. But you can't do that. Like you can't make maps look bad. You can't,
Yeah.
like what was the worst map that they have? But I think in folks' benefit, and I'm gonna say ours because I'm gonna probably knock on doors to make this happen, given all the communities that I work with and serve. But they're gonna have just like information, and then we're gonna come in with facts and be like, well, no, but what about this and what about that, what about the cost of living and so forth. And I think that the one thing that the folks who are opposed to the maps are gonna make it about Newsom, and it's like, yeah, sure, he did this and he was the one who led the charge, but for Latino voters and for those that are gonna be doing outreach, we're not gonna be making it about Newsom. We're like, yeah, he happened to be the person who put it on the ballot, but we're going to be talking about you and your family and what does it mean for you to be a small business owner or taquero or whatever it may be. And so I think that's going to be that's going to be my favorite part, because there's no one can hold and be like, well, they said this person's horrible. It's like I don't know if that's going to resonate with voters when they flood the mailboxes this time.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
but other things I think, as wanted to see if there's any other things that you're thinking about when it comes to things that folks need to do on Latino turnout, how to engage Latino voters. What other tips? I mean, we know that the Newsom administration listens to this podcast all the time. We've influenced them many, many times. So if you could tell him and his consultants what are things they could do, what would you say?
Well, I'm going to say that they did a great job hiring Camille Zapata.
Hey, that's true.
We love seeing a
Stockton.
Latina
Yes.
up here, doing her
Yeah.
thing. I think that was probably the best thing that they could have done for themselves.
Yeah.
But I think it also speaks to the importance of culturally competent content and like how you could reach more people when frame things in a way where people
Yeah.
can digest stuff. And so I think that's something that I just wanted to give a quick shout out.
That's
Secondly, I feel like we need to remember, like, if we're not at the table, we're on the menu, and this is our way to be on the table. So,
Exactly.
we just have to do whatever we can, because, we can't be that low voter turnout again.
Yeah. I think there's a few things for me. I think first to really engage folks. I know we've been doing a lot of work in the Central Valley, talking to young voters of color. And one thing that we have been doing around messaging to really get folks engaged all year has been talking about all of these like tax cuts that billionaires have been getting and how these tax cuts are directly coming from our communities. The programs that we're getting cut are now, that funding is now being used to fund billionaires. And so why do they deserve this money, and our communities deserve to suffer? And so I think that's something that we've really been seeing that has been resonating with young voters of color in the Central Valley. And then I had another point and it left my mind, but I'll be back.
Okay, well, let us know.
Yeah.
Now, the one thing that comes to mind is invest in Latino power in the local communities. And that means hire staff from those communities that can outreach
Yeah.
voters that are their neighbors in those communities.
Absolutely.
And have offices, have organizations that you invest in to build that power. Because voters don't trust, Latino voters are not going to trust somebody that comes in and they haven't seen before, but they're going to trust somebody that has been there living with them for their whole lives. That's how you build that power. We've seen examples of this happening well in other states. Unfortunately, the Republicans have been doing this well in Florida, for example, and in other states. So I think we got to start taking some of these strategies and just making sure that we build that unique power that we have from our community members.
Yeah, and I think that the anyone that is working on this election needs to really, echoing what Manuel said, tap into local superstars, our grass
Mm-hmm.
tops folks,
Mm-hmm.
and not just look at the folks that resonate with a lot of folks. I mean, Dolores Huerta is gonna be knocking on doors for sure,
Yeah.
right? Like that's a fact, right? But who is that local organizer, that community PTA mom that folks are going to be like, well, if she says this is okay, then I should think that this is okay.
Yeah.
I think there's that. And I
Yeah.
think not to shy away from Latinos who have historically voted conservatively. I think that
Yeah.
this is all open game, and that you should try to reach them as well in this time, because it is a very different scenario. And so that means unconventional thinking, different, a little slight difference on messaging, but they are open for discussion too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I would say if they didn't vote, if they voted conservative in the past, it's because they lost trust in the Democratic Party. So it's the onus is on the party to build that trust again.
Yeah.
So it's gonna and the only way you win those elections is if you build that trust with those voters.
Yeah.
I feel like I recently had a conversation with a few Latinas who were still registered Republicans, and they highlighted it like, I am not a MAGA supporter. Like, they made that very clear, like, in the beginning of the conversation. I don't remember what the context was, but I was trying to share something I was working on, and she's like, yeah, but I also want to elevate that. As much as I am strong for my party, I am not supporting this president. And so I think, to your point, Manuel, we really got to be hitting everyone across party lines, because they're out here saying, like, that's not my president, basically.
Absolutely.
So.
And I think also a lot of Latinos have seen the direct impact. Like, they've had their tios, their tias snatched up on the streets, right? And so even if they did vote conservatively, even during this last election, they might be directly feeling the actual impacts of this administration. And so it's really important to reach all of these voters, Latino voters, Black voters, AAPI voters, and really engaging all of the voters who are going to be impacted by this.
Well, before we wrap up our conversation, we always allow our guests to give a final thought and any words and expressions that you want to share, any shout outs. So we'll start with Manuel and then go to Ruth and then Carol, and then I'll close it out for the day.
Shout out to my abuelita, Josefina, who is in Santa Barbara, California.
Hey.
I'll show this to her later.
Yes.
Yeah. I'm going to do a quick plug to our organization, Power CA Action. Follow us on Instagram. Follow us on all social media platforms. And also, if y'all are from the Visalia area, check out Cypress Bakery. That's my parents. That's my parents' shop. They have a little taqueria on the outside too, so check it out.
Yeah, I feel like I just wanted to echo, like, let's check our voter registration. I know I moved recently.
Yeah.
Like, I got to make sure where I'm registered to vote. We all got to do that. We got to talk to our friends, our neighbors, like when we're grabbing coffee, quien sea. We just got to do what we can, because, like, we really need to right now. So whenever you get a chance, we got to do that, even if it's tough sometimes. But without us, we can't make it happen.
Yeah.
And then for myself, I think just the final thought is that while the special election may be highly politicized, I think that what is at stake is more important, and we've all kind of highlighted many different reasons. Education probably going to resonate with Latino voters the most.
Yeah.
Jobs in the economy is going to resonate with Latino voters the most.
Inflation.
And then in addition to what we're seeing with immigration enforcement and the unprecedented, kidnapping of our people.
Yeah.
So my final thought is just that I remember when I first got involved in elections, I knew nothing. I remember the first training I had to knock on a door and how nervous I was. This is your opportunity if you're a young Latino wanting to get involved, if you want to change what's happening, if you don't like what you're seeing on the news, happening to communities, happening in your pocketbook. It's okay. Volunteer with anyone who's working on this.
Power CA action.
Power CA action. Hey, for real, let's just plug them in. Like,
volunteer with
go
us.
Volunteer with Power CA action. I'm gonna volunteer with y'all. We're gonna do a day together. I'm gonna go down because they also serve pizza at the end. So our tacos at Cypress Bakery. Hey, we're gonna set it up to be continued.
I can't make any promises.
But it's not as scary, and when we do this, when we're talking about, there's different ways to do it. We do it at farmers markets. Yeah. We do it to your door, and we have real conversations. And people are actually really truthful and vulnerable about what their needs are, and we take that back and we take it serious. And so,
and do it with your friends. Like, invite your friend, go out, volunteer with an organization or with anybody who's doing that grassroots work, and make a day out of it. Like that's your hangout for the week with that friend. Yeah.
So we should see a lot of story times after this on social media. It'd be like story time of me volunteering to turn out the voters. Right? All right. So
it's fun.
Get ready with me to GOTV.
And then just the last thing I'll say is that we'll, as the Mesa Verde podcast, will definitely continue to cover this and bring you more specials and maybe other speakers who can speak in depth about what's happening on the ground and so forth. And then the last thing I just have to, as an alumni who used to work at Sheila, what they do every election is they bring out mariachis on election day for first time voters. I'm gonna call Angelica and be like, we're gonna turn out like first time voters and mariachis again, right? So it's an amazing experience. They had mariachis at Dodger Stadium one time because Dodger Stadium was a vote center, and so it was pretty dope. So that's the other thing. People who turned 18 before the election get a vote for the first time before next year. So let's see how many new young voters are going to get engaged in that time too. So I'll bring mariachis. I'll dress up if you need me to. So. But thank you everybody for joining us. It was great. Really pleasure having you all. I'm sure we'll all be knocking on doors together. And then thank you to all the listeners and the viewers for watching and listening. We appreciate you all, and stay tuned for what's about to come.
Thank you.
Thank you.
See you on the field.